Hello, my name is Wouter Haverals. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Antwerp in Belgium, where currently Professor Mike Kestemont and I are conducting a research project on a very intriguing medieval manuscript collection. And in this video, we will introduce the project and we will also contextualize it in relation to the recent notion of unediting. The Royal Library of Belgium in Brussels holds an incredibly rich collection of medieval manuscripts. A large part of this collection testifies to the rise of the vernacular language as a language of literature in the Low Countries. In this respect, a single page is a key witness to this process. It's a medieval book list dating from roughly 1400, and it begins as follows. Dit zijn die Dietse boeken die ons toebehoren. These are the Dutch books that belong to us. The book list is an intriguing text that is of great significance to the study of vernacular literature in the Low Countries. It originates from Rooklooster, Red Cloister, a priory in the Sonian forest close to Brussels. Although heavily stained, the page contains a listing of 29 Middle Dutch literary titles. Ever since its discovery, many scholars considered the list as irrefutable evidence for Rooklooster to be a thriving center of translation, scribal practice, and book production in the 14th century. However, nothing could be further from the truth. It was proven by Erik Kwakkel, who is not only a renowned scholar but also one of the most popular medievalists on Twitter, that the vast majority of the Red Cloister vernacular manuscript collection was in fact produced in the Carthusian monastery of Herne, some 30 kilometers southwest of Brussels. The cultural importance of the monastery in Herne is hard to overestimate. Especially in the second half of the 14th century, Herne was a true hotspot in the production and dissemination of vernacular literature. For their own library, for other religious communities, and even for the up-and-coming nearby Brussels citizenry, the monks at Herne diligently translated and copied numerous important works. To give one example, around 1360, parts of the Latin Bible were translated in Herne, anonymously, for the very first time into Middle Dutch. This renders it the first, almost complete Bible in a European vernacular language. The monastery's monumental legacy becomes clear if we aim to track down all the works that were produced at Herne. Currently, scholars have identified 54 booklets and manuscripts that can be considered as products of the monks. 43 of those are written in the Dutch vernacular. Recent literary studies into the Herne corpus have almost exclusively focused on issues of individual authorship and individual translatorship. Most notably, scholars have been chasing the identity of the Bible translator. However, the search for this mysterious author has so far not yielded any conclusive insights, and maybe it never will. Of course, the Bible translator is an important resident of the monastery, but from a literary perspective, zooming in on individual members in the community appears to be somewhat of an anachronism. In 2013, Frits van Oostrom explicitly called out to the scientific community to cease its quest for this elusive figure. The complete lack of self-attributions in the material suggests that the individual members aimed to place themselves in the shadows, at the advantage of their collective identity as a community. The current project, presented in this video, is mindful of Van Oostrom's appeal. By moving away from the limiting focus on individual authorship, we aim to acknowledge Herne as a strikingly effective case study into collective scribal practices. Based on formal aspects, Erik Kwakkel has identified 13 scribes who were active in Herne between 1350 and 1400. This indicates that almost everyone in this monastery was in some capacity involved in the book production activities at the time. Intense partnerships existed between the individual scribes who reviewed, corrected, and copied each other's work extensively. These partnerships are intriguing because it's a well-known fact that Carthusians lead lives of meditative silence. Only on rare occasions they use their voices. A contemporary, unprecedented glimpse into the quiet lives of Carthusian monks is provided by the wonderful documentary Into Great Silence by Philip Gröning. As a consequence of this silence, the Carthusian monks of Herne were required to develop creative strategies and solutions for communicating during their collaborative scribal efforts. Some of their conversations have been recorded as marginal annotations in their manuscripts, and this allows modern scholars to peek over the shoulders of the scribes as they negotiated text. With parchment as their shared working space, we are thus able to get a very privileged view on the communal network of the Charterhouse's scribes. One of the customs the monks developed is the insertion of a small sign, a struck-out letter D, in the margin where a correction was required. This method of marking is a unique practice, nowhere else to be found at the time but in the Charterhouse of Herne. The main research questions in the current project revolve around the monks' collaboration during their scribal activities. Namely, how did these scribes practically work together? Which scribes worked together and how intensively? Who made corrections for whom and on which topic? And did they influence each other's use of, for example, abbreviations and spelling over time? For this, we will need research materials, and this is where the concept of an unedition comes into play. One of the issues that we are confronted with is a severe lack of diplomatic editions that remain close enough to the actual manuscripts to be useful for scribal and linguistic analysis. In this respect, the notion of unediting, a term coined by Laura Moriali, is particularly useful when looking for answers to our research questions. After all, we are not so much interested in obtaining final, immutable editions of all the Herne manuscripts. Rather, we are interested in hyper-diplomatic editions that we can interact with, depending on the research question. Recently, the field of medieval studies has witnessed a number of major shifts. Some of these developments were predictable. We see textual scholarship gradually make the move from traditional editions printed on paper to digital editions that live in the cloud. From a static medium, we move towards a type of edition that is, in a way, only stable until the next bug fix or even browser update. This instability might seem like a bad thing, but it is in fact intentional. It is a conscious design feature, because this instability allows for improvements in the future. Some developments, however, were more difficult to predict. There is a clear surge, for instance, in the popularity of diplomatic editions that stay much closer to the sources, even a single source, than was the case in the era of critical editions. Maybe we still lack the proper technological instruments to make critical editions, but this is remarkable in any case. Additionally, the availability of handwritten text recognition is also pushing the relevance of hyper-diplomatic editions, because this technology fares better with hyper-diplomatic transcriptions. Furthermore, it is important to note that a conventional edition, in fact, is meant to make the access to the sources superfluous. Nowadays, we are increasingly putting the sources back in the spotlight. Probably this evolution has found a fertile ground in the paradigm of the new or material philology, where this trend has already been gaining traction before the rise of digital humanities. Perhaps most importantly, there is the issue of access, which has been greatly intensified by the pandemic. People have come to favor accessibility over accuracy. A person whose library is in lockdown will thankfully resort to an older edition of a particular work that is available on, for example, Google Scholar, even if its quality is inferior. We go to war with the weapons that we have. Also, note that traditional editions are typically commercial products, marketed by publishers instead of scholars, and protected by very defensive copyright laws. This is another aspect in which the open access unedition will likely be radically different from its traditional counterpart. In short, note how the unedition thus denies some of the fundamental characteristics of the traditional edition. It is deliberately unstable. It foregrounds the sources instead of trying to make them superfluous, and it favors accessibility over accuracy, although this was one of the hallmarks of conventional philology. Finally, Our goal with this project is indeed, in every possible way, to construct an unedition, not of a single manuscript, but of an entire library. We aim to virtually reconstruct the Herne library by having all manuscripts digitized and served over IIIF. In addition to just pixels, we aim for a library of pixels that can also be searched textually. All texts will be digitized via automated handwritten text recognition. For this purpose, we resort to the software package Transcriptions. The result deliberately won't be error-free, but rather good enough. Again, we value accessibility over accuracy. Because the transcriptions will eventually be used for detailed scribal and linguistic analyses, we opt for a hyper-diplomatic transcription standard that meticulously records the exact glyphs used on the page, including punctuation, abbreviations, and marginal notes. For this, we use an encoding standard developed by Peter Boot and Herman Brinkman at the Huygens Institute. This XML standard is based on the Text Encoding Initiative and complies with the present-day dominant practices in digital editorial scholarship. All of this material will be free. Not free as in free beer, but rather free as in free will, meaning that everyone will be able to build on these materials and reuse them for any purpose, as long as a scholarly attribution is provided. In this way, we hope that we will not be the only ones to study the manuscripts, but really that everyone is able to marvel at the silent voices that this collection contains.